I need to ask first, how many people were in my workshop yesterday? A lot of you. Okay. Okay, because there's going to be some overlap, but it won't be the same. But there will be a few things that I'll be talking about that are about the same sorts of things. How many of you are teachers in this group? Okay. This workshop is mostly aimed at people. And of those teachers, how many of you actually actively work with students, with children? Not that many. All right, because I had originally thought of this as being aimed at people about writing with children. But I think what I'm going to do is, on the fly, retool it slightly so that it's aimed a little more towards how one method of writing for children. How many of you are interested in writing for children? So actually more of you are interested in writing for children than with children. Okay, well the reason that this doesn't even faze me a whole lot is there are many approaches to all kinds of writing. And keep in mind this is only one approach, the way I approach things. I approach my writing for kids really the same way I approach my writing for adults. And I use the same kinds of techniques, and in fact, I use many of the same techniques when I do teach children. Which is one of the things I do. I teach at NYU, so I teach a lot of adults and people who are certainly think of themselves as writers. But I also do work in schools, and my knowledge of writing for children basically comes out of having taught children writing. Does that make sense? And that's why I'm saying this is not meant to be the only way to do things. I'm just telling you, I'm really sharing how I came to write for children. I've published 3, what they call in the trade chapter books, which means that they're not picture books and that they're pretty lengthy, and they have more words and maybe no pictures. In fact, I think my books have no pictures. So chapter books means it's already much more like a novel or a short story or something than it is like a picture book. In fact, I was told that picture books are much more like writing poetry, which I think is a really interesting thing, because if you think of a picture book for children, it's got like one line per page, and if you were to write the whole, they call it a script even, if you were to write the whole thing out, it would be something like a narrative poem. So my approach is fiction, straight fiction. I'm approaching it as out of a history, not of having been an expert in children's literature, which I'm not, but rather of being someone who partly earned her living by doing writing with children. So let me just, before I really plunge in, does anybody have a quick question or something that, what I really mean by that is something you particularly want to have covered? Because I want to try to touch on things that people would get something out of. So does anybody got anything they particularly want to have covered in this workshop? You just got to wait to have it poured into you, your empty vessels. All right, in that case, let me begin. This is where there's going to be a little overlap. One of the first things I want to say, and I've been hearing various people who are giving the presentations at the Clarksville Writers Conference say, the first thing is that in different ways, people are saying this in different ways. They're saying the same thing, which is separate your drafting, your process from your editing head. I heard Stephanie Pruitt say it this morning. She I don't know, I think most of you were there. She was talking about the shouldas or the shoulds, and not getting into beating yourself down. So the main thing in this case is to separate the two mental states, the mental state of drafting from the mental state of revising, and that's a really important thing. And I spent a lot of time on that yesterday, actually, and I'm not going to say more about that except to say that it's really, in my opinion, the ground of being a writer. If you don't start from that place, if you don't start from giving yourself the freedom to, I'm not even going to say make mistakes, but just be sloppy, let it out, flop it out there, and then get some momentum going. If you don't give yourself that, then it's, in my opinion, unlikely you're going to come up with something good for either adults or children or anybody else. Separately, and I think one of the workshops I would have liked to have gone to yesterday and didn't, was the one about the sentence in the short story. And sort of that other way of thinking was that it was a good workshop. Yeah. So that kind of up close and personal, how you make your sentences better and your structure better. That's essential. But I'm not going to stop saying this. But it's not the same thing as drafting your ideas. Okay. Then that's the first thing I want to say. Okay. Now, let me turn it a little bit more directly to writing for and working with children. For me, writing for children is essentially telling a story whose main character is a child. It's as simple as that. I was told a long time ago, one of my adult novels, I think it was my second novel, had, in my opinion, it was a very mature novel. It was told about a young woman and when she was a child, when she was a teenager, and then when she came back to a high school for her 10th high school reunion. So, this is to me, this is a grown-up book. And I was it had a very strong, I thought, strong structure, like childhood, adolescence, and it was kind of adult return to adolescence. It was called Higher Ground. And it turned up in a lot of lists for young adults. And I thought, well, gee, that's interesting. And, what made that a young adult? And I was told this was actually by a New York City librarian who put it in their young adult section. She said, oh, it's because the main character is a young adult, in this case for, maybe 2/3 of the book. That's it. I mean, basically, if the story has a child at the center or a young person at the center, and, depending on a few other little items, if it also fits certain rules, which tend to be things like not using profanity, that sort of thing, then you are dealing with something that's for children or young adults. In fact, my first novel for children was called The Secret Superpowers of Marco. I have a copy of it out there for sale. I just brought a handful of books with me, but I did bring them, a couple of them. And Marco I had always written for adults. However, I had been working for a number of years with children in some fairly rough neighborhoods. It wasn't, the school was a pleasant place. It wasn't that the schools were, blackboard jungle or something, but the kids themselves had lives that were not so sweet always. And my little boy, who tells the story himself, it's a first-person narrative, used, I think, 2 curse words, and not even very bad ones. I think they were, like some bad, to say the truth, I've forgotten. And they were just I think there were 2 of them in the book. And the editor of the book, who was, I went to see her big high-rise in New York City. It was pretty impressive anyway, just to be in there. It was HarperCollins was the publisher. And so this editor, sat down and said, we're going to publish a book, we really like it, blah, 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 but you have to do a couple of things. One of the things you have to do, she said, was you have to get rid of the curse words. And I was at first a little offended because as I said, my background is as a creative writer, and if a bad word comes out, it must be wrong there, and it's my creative work. And she said, it's just a rule of HarperCollins. She said that in our middle grade, which is like for kids 7 to 12, but I would say 4th, 5th graders are a little harder for the group. She said, for that we simply don't use curse words. Now, I'm not sure this is true with all publishers, and I'm not sure it continues. I think you can probably find some novels out there that use words, but she said, we don't. And my son was 8 at the time, and I thought it over, and I said, am I caving in to the commercial possibilities of my book being published by a big publisher? And I said to myself, yes, I am. I really want this book published, and if it means taking out 2 words, okay. At the same time, I really realized I didn't want my 8-year-old son learning how to spell those words from a book I'd written. So, so like that was, I got it. The reason I'm just telling this is I'm saying something about what's different about writing for children and writing for adults. There's certain things you do. I do want to say, though, that I think it was very important that I felt the freedom to draft that novel using the words that I had heard my students say. So that was important. To then say to myself, well, for this final product, I actually don't want my son to learn to spell those words from my book. I actually want it to be in the way that, in the format that will sell and that libraries will purchase and everything. So the main point about that, aside from just the fact of what it was that it was two separate processes. It was my writing was one thing, and the other thing was what the publisher wanted. They had let me tell one more thing, and I'll come right back to you. And they had one more rule, which this one actually disturbed me more than the curse word. They said that many of my sentences were too long for children, and they actually asked me to shorten some sentences. This one disturbed me a little more, and I actually take this book pretty often and read sections to 4th graders and 5th graders, and I always tell them that, and I say, do you think kids should have shorter sentences or longer sentences? And almost invariably they all say, oh, we should have more challenging sentences. So they, at least theoretically, the little kids think the sentences should be longer. On the other hand, what they asked me to do tended to be period capital letter instead of comma and. So I did not, in fact, the words were very little changed. It was just simply, in fact, if you read the story aloud, there was almost no change. So again, I was willing to deal with that, let me put it that way. So anyway, what was your question?
It's sort of in that same vein. I've been writing adult fiction, but I want to do a project for that 9 through 12-year-old. And I'm wondering, like you said, when you had a book that was about that character, when you set out to do a children's project, do you try to write as if you're telling a story to a child, or do you write it and then go back later and sort of see where you went a little too maybe advanced with vocabulary or a little too complex with sentence structure and then try to like cut it back? Or, I mean, is that writing, or you just find your voice like you're talking to a 12-year-old and telling them a story, you know?
I think that's a real writerly question, about how you do it. And, with assuming that you're writing what you want to write first and separating out the editing of it. I primarily, I think my model is kids writing their own stories for me. Like kids, in other words, it's a kid writing in his own voice or her own voice, and they're telling the story they're either actually writing the story down, or they're telling it to a receptive adult, maybe, or maybe a receptive friend. I've only done first-person novels for kids, so it's a kind of narrow thing, actually, because I actually hear a kid's voice. I remember once I was taking a jog, and I actually remember the beginning of my first Marco book, and I was jogging, and I had this idea for a fable that I had written a long time before, and while I was out running, all of a sudden I hear this boy's voice. Now, I had talked to a lot of kids, and I'd heard them talking, and all of a sudden I hear this little boy's voice in my head, and it's Marco, and he's telling me, this is one of those things that sounds magical, it's like he's telling me his story, and that's very much like other things that I had written and read and everything, and certainly what kids had written. But there it was, he was talking to me, and so it became, that's why I say it was like an actual 8, 9, 10-year-old child talking to me. That's how I did it. Many people love the Once Upon a Time style, so like if you're wanting to write for children and you've got the voice that you hear is is somebody telling a story around a fireplace at night, then go for it. Do what comes to you. I do think with children's writing, it's some authentic voice, whether it's the grandma telling a story around the fire, or the big brother telling a story while they walk through the woods hunting, or whether it's the child talking to a teacher or a friend. I think that somehow that authentic voice is essential, but otherwise I think it's pretty open. I'm going to run us through a couple of exercises today, and I want to, having said that business about the separation of the process and the product, and said those general things about children's writing, and I will want to save time at the end for questions about this sorts of things. And then a few more people have come in. Let me ask another time. How many people do I have here are teaching children? Just a couple. How many people are thinking of writing for children? So, okay. All right, nothing has changed on that. The second thing to keep in mind is that all fiction, whether it's for kids, whether it is for adults, needs, well, first it needs that authentic voice, whatever kind of voice it is. Second, it tends to work with very concrete objects. When I did my novel writing workshop yesterday, we began with an object, a concrete object, and tried to put that into a novel. Writing for kids, you certainly can do the same sort of thing. But another approach to this I want to focus on is actually character creation out of something concrete. Usually people, when they think of creating characters, tend to think of maybe a list of characteristics, or a list of qualities, or a personality sketch. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I actually like to begin with something, with actually concretely observing a person from the outside. And let me do this as a little visualization. If for those of you who do work with kids, when I work with kids, I actually use this particular technique. Works, I think, equally well with adults. But what I'd like you to do is we're going to do a visualization of a character. So what I'd ask you to do is close your eyes for a moment. And this is the part that, as adults, I'm just going to ask you to come along with me, go along with me in this part here. We're going to have a mirror in front of you. You're standing in front of a mirror, but you do not see your reflection. Instead of a reflection, you see a kind of misty, smoky swirliness. And you're going to step through that misty, swirly smokiness. You're going to step through to the other side. And on the other side, you see a person that you have actually known or seen in real life. This works better if it's not your husband or your wife or your child or somebody really close to you. It works best if it's someone you know a little, who have observed, have been interested in, but don't really know. So in your imagination, you're now through the mirror, and there's this person, and the person can't see you. You are essentially invisible. And you very slowly and gently approach the person, observing them with all of your available senses. You notice the person's age, gender, size. Are they tall? Are they a big person? Are they a slight person? Are they a person who stands straight? Do they seem nervous? Are they stooped? What age are they? Perhaps what race or ethnic group, if that's something you can tell. You're going to notice their clothing, how they're dressed. Notice how they stand. A lot of things you can tell by looking at someone. But also in your imagination, as you approach, have the person speak and listen to the timbre of their voice. Have they a noticeable accent? Do they sound different from most people you know? Do they have a raspy smoker's voice? Do they sound like they come from, around the corner or across the country, perhaps even from a foreign country? Is the voice loud? Is the voice soft? Just a little bit about how they sound. And you're invisible and you're kind-hearted. You're not going to do anything hurtful. You're going to go right up close to the person and very gently touch their textures. Notice what kind of hair they have. Is the hair long and fringed at the end, or is it kind of dense and curly? Actually going to touch the hair, possibly the skin, the handshake. Is their hand sweaty, calloused, limp, smooth? And the most intimate of all, while you're up close, actually notice if there are any odors that you pick up. Is the person wearing a fragrance that you can maybe even identify, or an aftershave? Are they wearing, have they been exercising so that you actually smell body odor, perhaps nice, healthy, active sweat? And now keep your eyes closed and keep observing your person. And for about half a minute, I want you just to continue doing that while I'm silent. Open your eyes and spend about 4 minutes now briefly writing a paragraph describing that person. The objective here is not description, but rather observing a character from the outside. So we're going to take about 4 minutes. So just begin. I also want to say that if anybody, I actually said the opposite at my workshop yesterday, if anybody has questions as we go along, please feel free to ask, and if I need to, I will, I'll shut you off, because I do have some things I want to cover, but I want to make sure that you're getting the things that you need from this. So particularly those of you who are thinking of writing books for children, or anything else, feel free to raise your hand and ask. How did you find this exercise? And I'm also curious what sorts of, actually, before I ask that question, just one word, I'd like to have everybody just share one word, the type of character you did, like was it a little boy, a stranger on the street, just I want to hear the kinds of characters you did. What did you do?
A little girl.
I'm sorry?
A little girl.
A little girl? A little girl? A little girl?
Mine was a big girl.
A big girl, okay. What did you do?
An Asian man. An Asian man.
An Asian man, okay, all right. What did you?
An adult man.
An adult man, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
No.
all right.
Grandpa.
A grandmother,
Teenager.
a teenage boy or girl?
Girl.
Uh-huh.
Female adult.
Okay.
A Mediterranean man.
Uh-huh, okay.
My 15-year-old granddaughter.
Oh, okay, you actually did your
A male youth.
a male youth, okay.
30-something housewife, mother.
A housewife who might be like, say, a mother of a
Mother of
child or
children.
something like that, uh-huh.
A present-day 70-year-old Native American male.
Oh, interesting. And you are thinking of doing a children's book?
Sure.
Maybe, okay. I mean, but this would be, okay, fascinating idea, okay, yeah.
20-something now.
Okay, so we've got a lot of children, a number of young adults, not all that many older people, but a handful of those, at least one person who I take to be of a different ethnic group from the viewer, and yours also would have been a different ethnic group from the viewer. Okay, interesting. And now let me ask the question, how did you find doing that? Was it hard to do? Where did you find the person that you did? What was, how was that exercise?
It was imaginary.
Hmm?
Imaginary is something that became visionary.
So you immediately something came visually to you?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay, good. Did you find it hard to do, or easy, or someplace in between? How did you find it?
Easy.
And why was that?
It was actually my daughter that I was describing, but usually with characters, they just kind of pop up. Images in my head.
Okay. How did you do with the smell? Did everybody manage to get the sense of smell into it? Did you do that? Did you find it? What was your sense of smell?
Just like a child, I don't really know how to describe it verbally, but a child just has a smell, a skin smell, a clothing smell. So
A certain, okay, a child's clothing and skin smell. The skin smell, I think, is particularly of interest, because something. How about you?
I used sweat and strawberry shampoo.
Sweat and strawberry shampoo. That's with the concrete. Anybody else? How did you do the smell?
Not smell. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead.
I found my voice changing. When I started writing, I was writing it from the perspective describing this grandpa-like character. And then halfway through my writing, I switched from a little boy's perspective, describing his experience for this character.
It's still a boy's voice, though, a young
Yeah.
person's voice. Huh. So you began. Okay, I'm glad you said that because.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to describe his character so that I guess I'm describing who he is, what I want him to be. But then all of a sudden, this little boy comes along and says, "Yeah, let me tell you what we do." And I find myself writing about the experiences of this little boy relating to this man I just created.
One of the reasons to do this kind of descriptive writing, and you could do it for a place, you did it yesterday for an object, you could be doing it now for a person. One reason to do it actually is, for some reason, if you make yourself really experience a thing, its sense impressions, it will sometimes set things off in you, ideas or different voices. And for me, at least 90% of the reason to do this is not, teachers often encourage children to do descriptive writing as if that were in itself a good thing. And I'm not sure it actually is for those of you who are teachers, because in fact, Americans don't like to read description all that much these days. We're so used to having somebody show it to us, on the television or in the computer. I actually think the reason for descriptive writing is twofold. If you do a lot of it, the process of like accumulating details, you're going to then have a few that you might not have gotten otherwise. Like you might not have gotten strawberry and sweat if you hadn't really been focusing on. If you've just been describing, you might have just stuck with your visuals, but you got you may have gotten it. So that's one thing, is some details you can pull out. But more important, it will sometimes actually open up something in you, and something will come out that might be plot, that might be a new character's voice. It's something different and unexpected will come out. There's nothing magical about this. It's a matter of opening up some of your unconscious and subconscious things that you already have. I mean, we've all got so much more in us than we actually use. I mean, you've heard these stupid things about how they say people only use, they only think 8 minutes, only think originally 8 seconds a day or 8 minutes a day or something. It's kind of ridiculous, but the point is that we do have more than we use. We have ideas that we need to get in touch with. And if you're going to be a writer, part of the discipline is to find these materials. So part of the discipline is to find the materials.
I had clean, innocent shampoo, and she's 15. I'm worried about her innocence.
You're worried about?
I'm worried about the loss of her innocence.
Uh-huh. Oh, and it came out of the shampoo?
Clean, innocent shampoo.
But this is exactly how it works. I remember, I used to have a boyfriend who smoked a pipe. And it wasn't my boyfriend very long, but he smoked, and people don't smoke pipes so much, but a few years ago, and now we're talking 30 years in the past, but I'm walking down the street, and I smell the smell of cherry blend. It was something called cherry blend, and it was like those bad old movies where they go whirl, 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 back in time, and I go, whoa, and suddenly this guy was like before me, and it was done by smell. I mean, there's nothing like a smell, and also other things, but certainly a smell is nothing like it. Yeah.
Speaking of smell, and I did not realize that, but my brother who passed away several years ago. I'm sorry. My brother passed away several years ago. And his son was lost to us. He was taken away from us and brought back. And we saw him like 27 years later. The minute I saw him, the day I saw him, I'll never forget, I told him, I said, you smell just like him. You smell just like him. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, well, I don't remember him having a smell. I mean, the minute, we hugged, it was like, I remember that smell. It was that, like that distinctive smell.
That's really, that's really kind of powerful. That it will sometimes throw you for a loop too.
It did. Yeah. In fact, it was wonderful because he lost his dad at such an early age. He lost him at like 4 years old. So to have that back is that connection. And we constantly talk about, yes, your dad loved you, yes, this is what happened. And me as an adult, just telling a young adult, older, yes, this is what he said about you, and the smell, I couldn't believe it.
That's really great. Wow. My connection to children's writing it's not all that different than my connection to adult writing. To write for children is not necessarily to make up a new version of Purple Barney or something. It is actually, I think that children have equally deep emotions. I mean, one of the reasons that most of us remember our childhoods way beyond, the older people get, the more they will remember details from their childhood. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that you truly do feel just as powerfully then as you do now. I mean, like the smell was building up all those years, But the other thing is that many of the sensations we have as children, we're getting them for the first time. And one of the reasons people come to conferences is to kind of get restarted and get some new ideas, we say, meet some new people. And what that is we sharpen when we have a new experience, when we do something for the first time. So children's experiences are often the first or one of the first or, first kisses. I mean, everybody. I mean, I'm not going to ask for hands, but how many people remember their first real kiss? Don't answer that, And you can think of any number of other things. First day of school is such a typical school writing assignment. And the reason it's so typical is it's something everybody remembers. They remember starting school. They remember their firsts. So when you work with ideas for children, one of the things that you keep in mind is that you do want things vivid. You do want things that connect to children's experiences, and one way to do that is to connect with your own. When I was writing my Marco books, I was writing about somebody from a very different part of the world than I'm from. I was writing about a little boy, and I sometimes say to classes, I was never a little boy, and kids always get a big laugh out of that for some reason. I'll be satisfied with a chuckle here, but the point is I was imagining somebody very unlike me. And one of the ways I connected was I did come up with a bully character who was straight out of my childhood. There was a boy in my second grade class, well, I'll use the real name with you. His name was Franklin Mara. And he was a, he was what we used to call a flunker. He was a holdback. He had been held back a few years, which they don't do so much anymore. They have other ways of dealing with kids, like special classes. And Franklin was, we were in second grade. Franklin had the beginnings of a mustache. He was really a big old boy. And he was a huge rough boy. And we used to change positions in the classroom when the music teacher came. And I got moved to the front, and he was moved to the back. And once he bumped me, and it scared me to death. And it just knocked me over, and I was little and he was big. And so the next time the music teacher came, it came time to change classes, I very carefully moved to the far side of the seats so I would avoid Franklin. Franklin came after me. He came with me, and I moved farther over, and Franklin came closer. And I was getting really terrified, and then he leaned over and he said in this big, deep voice, "I'm sorry I bumped you last week." And it was like an epiphany for me. Now, it's not to say that people, that there aren't real bullies. We know there are. It's not to say that anything's not true that's true. But Franklin actually was not bullying me. Franklin was, he bumped me by mistake, and he apologized. And I still remember this. All these years later, this kid apologized to me. Now, that incident is not in my story, but I used that feeling of being terrified of a bully, of somebody who was too old for the class. And I used that in my story and also some of the other feelings involved with it. So the way you connect with children is you go back to your own memories, and you, and of course you also imagine things. These descriptions of the characters, we're going to continue working with character, but I'd love to hear one or two. Anybody up for reading what you wrote? Or who is up for reading what you wrote? Let's start with you. I'm going to ask you to stand just to make your voice go bounding out there.
The Asian man stood with his back perfectly straight. His hair was once jet black, but tinges of gray specks were affecting his shiny hair. His hair is pulled back in a short, well-groomed ponytail. He stands about 5'9" or 5'10". He is in great shape. As I approach, I notice not only the specks of gray in his hair, but I also notice the lines on his eyes and his mouth. Otherwise, his skin is flawless. He is wearing a black t-shirt, black jeans, and black boots. He has the smell of coffee and a recently smoked cigarette clinging to his skin. It fits him. It's not offensive or abrasive. It is simply him.
Oh, that's very good. That's very nice. And, it's interesting because it follows the pattern I asked you to do, but I didn't particularly feel you straining to do that. It just seemed natural, like you were walking up to, like the speaker, I should say, was walking up to him. Let me ask a question about that one. If you had drafted what she just read to us, and it's a good piece of writing, and you were working towards using this in a children's novel, say a novel where, I don't know, where the child is afraid of there's this man, or they have to ask him a question, they have to ask directions, how would you revise that to make the speaker a child and have the child's feelings? I'm not saying you should do this, I'm asking it as a question. What would you do to what she wrote? How would you change it to make it more of a piece for children?
Take out the gray and the lines. The child is not going to necessarily notice if somebody has gray hair unless it's really, really gray. A child is not going to notice necessarily crow's feet or little laugh lines. A child is going to notice how big he seems. A child wouldn't equate, 5'9", 5'10". A child would say he's as big as a bus, as big as a
So you're saying a child is unlikely to say, to guess at the actual numbers. That was one of the things I thought. A child, let me be very clear here. I'm not saying you should do this to what you wrote. I'm using this as an example of how you could start with just writing as you for yourself and then make it for children. So one thing would be that the child would probably not estimate size. I think you're absolutely right about that. I think kids don't have those numbers in their heads. And how about what she said about the gray hair and the crow's feet? Is that correct? I think that's a really good point. Do you think that kids notice?
I think they think everyone's old.
Old Asian.
If they're older than their parents, I think that's their
I think they probably think their parents are old. I think, I haven't thought about this, but I think they know teenagers because most younger kids want to be a teenager as fast as possible. But I think they don't, beyond that, it's old is old. And they probably would notice a full head of white hair or gray hair. They're less likely to notice the threads of gray kind of. Okay, excellent point. All right, so that would be one thing we might use to take a piece of our natural writing to, move it towards kids. What else? Anything else about that one? Yeah.
About hers.
Just about her as well. And how if, well, what about you? What would you do to make it more child friendly?
I would probably mention my height versus his height.
I'm sorry, you probably what?
My height versus his height.
Okay.
And I would have it more in a simpler voice.
Simpler meaning what, shorter sentences or?
Simpler meaning less descriptive.
Okay. I think
I approached the Asian man and he was dressed in all black versus the black t-shirt, the black jeans, the black boots.
I think the white boots a kid might pick out. I'm just thinking about what details a kid might likely pick out. I think all black, absolutely. Asian, yes. White boots, And I also think you would want to get something about what the child is feeling towards this person, which I'm not positive. I don't know if it's fear or, just neutral or whatever, but the size I think is important. Okay, good. I don't want to, beat this to death, but the point is drafting, again, as it comes to you, and finding a way to revise it so that it might be fitting for a child's work. Also, I actually think that there's some really interesting plot there. What if this child's in the story, and maybe not the story for you here, what if the child, is lost in a big city? They've gotten separated from their family or their school group or whatever, and so they're now looking at these various people. Who are they going to choose to ask for help or whatever? And then you've got a plot going. Right? Okay, you were going to read also?
Yes. The little girl sat at the low round table, bent over her crayons and paper. The table was in a semi-darkened room, with the light from the window falling on her artwork. Her white blonde hair tickled her face, and she took her hand to swipe it away. She spoke to the 3 dollies in chairs around the other side of the table. One chair to her right was empty, and it had been pulled out away from the table, as if it were just waiting for someone to sit in it. I moved out of the misty shadow and sat in the chair. The little girl's right hand was working feverishly to complete her picture. And I was drawn to touch her hand. And her hand became still as she looked at it as though a bug had tickled her. She wiped her arm and went back to her artwork.
That's lovely. That's really lovely. It's absolutely not written for children to read. It's written for me to read. And it's very beautiful. And I like that a lot, actually. And the thing about the touch and the bug and all is really, really good. But you know what I mean when I'm saying this is not something a child would enjoy. Well, I don't know if they enjoy it. They just wouldn't read it. It would have too many words. It would have a different tone. Here's the next thing we're going to do is actually going to take, I'm going to take a little time later to see if anybody else wants to share. But I want to ask you now to do the next step, which is go into the head of this character that you wrote about, particularly for those of you who describe children, but for anybody. So you're also putting, you got the Asian guy, could be a challenge, but whoever you did, I want you now, here's how I'm going to ask you to do it. I'm going to ask you again to close your eyes. The eye closing is just because we're in a room with a lot of distractions and you're not your usual writing place. So if you close your eyes again and close your eyes. Some people have a lot of trouble closing their eyes in public. And in your imagination, take that character you wrote about, even the words that you wrote, and just kind of have it before you. And I want you to be move yourself so that you go inside that character, so you actually are experiencing what they are experiencing. So that instead of looking at the little girl with the light falling on her and the crayons and the dollies, you are that little girl, or you are the Asian guy with some child approaching you. You're going to be thinking what you're thinking. You're going to be in your first person. I. I'm sitting here, I see, I wonder, there's my grandma, who's that little child? I don't have time for this. Can be kind of broken like a stream of consciousness, or it can be something else. Just for about half a minute, listen to your person speak in your mind, kind of what they're thinking. And now open your eyes and skip a space or two, and just for about 3 minutes, write a monologue, write the thoughts in the voice of that person that you were describing. Well, again, how did you find going into this character? Because I was very explicit about it being somebody at least a little distance from you. Did you find that hard to do, easy? How did you find it?
Well, when we did the first exercise, I didn't think about it in terms of a main character of a children's story, but did the mother, the housewife.
It doesn't have to, but anyway, go ahead.
Right, so then when we started talking about more of the children's fiction, I went into her voice. I looked at her voice from how it might fit into the characters in children's fiction. So I just wrote her. It was a little tough, but I had her talking about her son and her son's friend. So like
and you're actually the main character will be the son, is the idea?
Yeah, it would be one of the younger kids. So how the kid sees his friend's mom.
Okay, if you want to share, I'll ask you in a second. But let me say a couple of things first. This exercise has two purposes, and I was kind of trying to get it to fit what I was hearing from the different kinds of characters you described. One is simply to figure out how to go into a child's head. So if you're writing about the little girl or about the teenager, or whatever, how do you get into that child's voice? The other thing this exercise is really good for in all kinds of fiction is deepening any character. So, you may never, this mother in a child's book, it's likely never to tell much about her inner life, but it sure is good for you to know something about it. So one of the purposes is simply to imagine what is it like to be this character, and that's just like background for you as a writer. Or, again, you may find a way to work it in. There might be a conversation, there might be a letter, there might be a document of some sort, you might be able to actually use it. Who else found it a little hard? You said it was a little hard to do.
I found it more difficult
to
go into the mind of a 15-year-old than to describe physically a 15-year-old.
Yeah, I don't find it so hard to go into. I can imagine being a teenager or being a child, but I have a lot of trouble with current culture because that's in their minds. What's in a lot of kids' minds is whatever it is, the latest electronics, the latest singers or whoever. And I'm always having this question in my mind of I can imagine being them, but I'm not quite sure of the content of their daily life. You're smiling. You don't have any trouble with that? You're close enough to it?
I'm just thinking about how complex that is and how it's constantly changing, because the media is constantly, what might be current this year, 2 years from now. So I was just thinking about how it's got to be something that's vague, if you're talking about a celebrity or whatever, it's got to be something vague enough that it's not so connected to something real that.
You made the point that I wanted to make. Paris Hilton. How many people know who Paris Hilton is? Probably most of you. How many people don't know who Paris Hilton is? Okay, this is a name that I will promise you. I would lay large money that within 10 years there will be no hands going up, or maybe one hand, somebody who specializes in, and actually she's one of these people she was like what are they, not the Kevorkians, the Kardashians, who are they? K sisters. She had their place in popular culture 5 years ago. Anyway, she was a celebrity to be a celebrity. It doesn't matter, except for the point that you made, which is if you think you're writing about the present, you better get published really fast because the present recedes amazingly rapidly. I teach a fair number of people, like 20-somethings, 30-somethings at NYU. They're people pretty up on current culture, but books and movies and names that everybody that I could toss out, and people, you know, when you're teaching, you're supposed to connect with your audience. And I used to make these connections that worked. They don't work anymore. I've got to find new connections. but the point, from a writer's point of view, is the easy thing, not easy, but one good choice is to be really sure all novels are historical novels, children's novels, adult novels. Even if it's set in 2011, it's going to be a historical novel by the time it gets published. So one thing to think about is actually to write a novel. I have a friend who wrote a children's novel about the days when the United States and the Soviet Union had missiles aimed at each other all the time. And he wanted to write about that time, that point in time. And what he did was have two little boys in a suburban neighborhood who were building rockets, and they were aimed at each other's houses. They were enemies. And he does a whole really interesting thing that was, I mean, it's not, they're not going to kill each other, but it becomes, how do you talk to this person who's making a bigger rocket, a better rocket, and aiming at you? So very clever, but very set in a time and place, which many of us, certainly kids today, have no idea what it was about or what it was like. How many of you actually have a children's novel in mind that you're thinking of doing? It's not just a kind of, I'd like to write one. Several of you do. Let me, if you raise your hands if you want to share this. What is the time and place for the novel that you're thinking of writing? What's yours?
Now.
Okay, well then you got to think about when now is.
Right. I'm trying to keep it vague so that, you know, for some span of years it'll still be pretty current. Nothing that anchors it to a specific year.
I mean, one of the things you have to think about is, do the children or the particularly young adults in your novel, do they have cell phones? You know, I mean, because whether or not they're carrying around cell phones has a lot to say about when. It also is a huge plot device. I mean, you know, how are you, if you want your child to get lost or be in trouble, how are you going to deal with the fact that ordinarily they have a cell phone? They call home, call their mother. You're going to have a cell phone, just go out, you know, be uncharged. You got to work out something. This is not a bad thing. All these things can become challenges. They can be part of the fun of, you know, plotting your story. Okay, you're trying to keep it vague. Don't keep it too vague because you've also got to be concrete. But yeah, and when's yours said?
It's the same thing, and I consider the cell phone issue and more. I mean, it's not like romance, but like there's a character of 12-year-old boy and 12-year-old girl, and then how they communicate with their community of friends via Facebook, Twitter, you know, because I do have a chance to work with, you know, a couple hundred kids in that age range every year, and some of them have cell phones. They're on Twitter.
Yeah.
I mean, they're on Facebook.
Are you planning to use those things in your story?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's
okay,
going to be plot devices, but again, having to be not too vague. But if it takes 5 years to see the light of day, you know, is it going to be vital to the plot where now it has to become, they're going to be actually be reading about, remember back in 2011?
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. I mean, I'm not offering an answer to this. I'm just saying this is the kind of thing, particularly with contemporary children's writing or other, you have to think about. And there's nothing wrong, by the way, with writing about children who feel alive and real, but whose lives are taking place at some point in the past. A real, you know, a truly historical novel. You know, children who are during the Civil War or in 1940 or what, you know, whatever you'd like to do. You can do that, but the trick then becomes the opposite thing, which is how you make the kids feel totally real to a current child. And these are challenges, not anything terribly difficult. How about you had one? What's yours? When's it set?
Well, I have a young adult novel more for teenagers, but this one that I'm working on, it's really for present time, and there's nothing that links it to a particular time at all. But it's very small niche people are looking for, and it's helping children deal with death.
How children deal with
But
death.
it's from a 4-year-old's perspective of learning about what death is and being explained.
You know, I'm offering some ways to begin writing a children's novel, beginning with characters, and I'm suggesting start with some description outside, go inside, either to learn about the character or to capture the voice. There are, again, other ways of approaching novels, and one of which is actually to start with an idea. I have a student, a woman who is a retired school administrator in West Virginia, who's one of my online students, and she's writing a novel about difficulties in a coal community, because she has a little girl character. It's not a little girl, she's like an early high school character whose mother is one of the first coal miners underground, and there are all kinds of issues with this woman going underground. And there's also an issue with the fact that it's a gassy mine and the bosses are not reporting it. So she's starting with issues, and I hope it's a good novel. Her problems tend to be the child does not always seem realistic. You know, she's got you have different challenges depending on where you start. So if you start with a plot, you tend to have one sort of problems. And if you start with characters, you tend to end up with, gee, what are they going to do next kind of thing. So it's always something, right? And what was yours?
Actually, mine's like the 1960s era, Vietnam. Mm-hmm. My son is 11, and my dad was in Vietnam. So my son often talks to me, what did Papa feel? What did he experience? So together, we have sat down and started writing a book.
Is your father alive?
He is. He is. And he had a pet monkey, and the pet monkey's name was Sergeant.
Oh.
So it's about a little boy who has a monkey named Sergeant.
Huh. And you're using the Vietnam stuff?
Yes.
In what way?
It'll be like on the TV. It's in the background.
Okay, so it's on the back. And is the child's father going to be?
Yes.
That is, again, I'm glad these things are coming up because you're seeing the different directions you can come from. I want to talk with you for another 5 minutes or so, and then I want to see if there are questions. But anybody up for sharing anything they've written so far, the monologue or particularly, but anything, yeah.
Which one?
Whatever you want to do, whichever part you'd like to do.
I do a lot of stage shooting, so I'm just not using the flashy and the low a lot.
Be louder than they are.
Okay. At 15, Claire has the body of a petite ballerina. Long fingers and legs, tiny waist, flat, smooth stomach, long, slender feet that long for the pink ballerina shoes she no longer uses. Her violin lessons do not fill the empty space made by her mother's no to continued ballet lessons. Her soft brown shoulder-length hair smells like a sweet, fruity perfume or a clean, innocent shampoo. Her heart-shaped face presents a small, pursed, lightly lipstick and glossed pout to her admirers. Her voice is soft. Her words flow quickly in an effort to get her message across before her adult audience shifts their attention. They would just listen. No, that's not the problem. If they could just really care and understand. Well, I guess I don't even understand. I feel afraid, even lonely when I'm with my family. They seem to know what they want from life, or at least what they don't want. Sometimes I know exactly what I want to do, where I want to go, who I want to be with or be. But most of the time, I'm just plain bored, terribly, awfully, horribly alone. Why can't they see this? There's no place I fit in. There's only a black hole in my mind, and I'm being sucked into it like a star when it's born.
Wow. Oh, I like that. What was the very first line of the monologue?
If they would just listen.
It was what?
If they would just listen.
If they would just listen. I mean, that's a wonderful first line, by the way. And the whole thing is, I'm not saying it couldn't be edited or shouldn't be edited, but it felt to me like you caught something important about the teenager. I don't know. Anybody want to respond to that? What did you think?
Oh, I liked it. It's very, very exactly what the teenager feels most of the time. They feel like they're just floating around somewhere and they're talking to adults, they're not paying attention, and they're just like saying, it's like the Charlie Brown, The teenagers feel that way too. Because I teach middle school. Their biggest joy is looking them in the eye and really listening to them. And you can tell by when they walk in the room what kind of day they've had. And of course, it could change within 30 days per minute. Because and for a teenager to have to deal with the way their body's changing and everything else, and just the world's just swirling. It's hard to find that stable place because they don't have that stable place yet.
Now, I like that. I like the part where someone would be with, like because obviously your love is in the background. If you were to write about this in this teen voice or about a girl like this, I think you would probably have to do some things to separate her in your mind from your real granddaughter. I'm a great believer in beginning with real people, particularly real places, real things. But if it's something you're close to, you have to find a way to not to distance yourself, but to see them, because you'll and that's a little tricky. Sometimes it's enough to change the hair coloring or change their hobbies or something, but you sometimes have to change things a little bit. We're down to about 10 minutes, and I want to be sure to have people ask me a couple of questions, but I wanted to tell you what was on this sheet I handed out. One side, the side with all the quotations. This was what I was thinking about in terms of teaching. These are things that I often use with young people. The bottom two we'll ignore, which are descriptions, pretty elaborate descriptions of places. The third one from the top is a traditional 19th century elaborate description where they just describe and describe and describe. But I actually want to read you the other two. The first one is a description in the voice of a woman remembering what things were like when she was a child. This is Maxine Hong Kingston's wonderful memoir, The Woman Warrior. So this is about children, but it's meant to be for adults in an adult's voice. She wore black bangs and her cheeks were pink and white. She was baby soft. I thought that I could put my thumb in her nose and push it bonelessly in and indent her face. I could poke dimples into her cheeks. I could work her face around like dough. So this is her memory of how she reacted to a particular little girl who she felt was too passive. She doesn't do these things to her, she just imagines them. And the next one is a description in my Marco's voice of another person. So this is like a combination of the assignments I gave you. It's the first person, but it's a description of a neighborhood character. Now I think I have to describe Crazy Wee Wee a little bit. I said how he beat on Sister Serena's big boy, but he would look scary even if he never hit anybody. Starting from the top of him, you see first hair that he never cuts, so his whole head is like a forest for lice. You can't tell where his hair ends and his beard and mustache start, but it's all a yellowy color. In the middle of his head are his eyes, and they are different colors. The blue one looks one way, and the gray one looks the other, and the blue one is like it's going to burn you with fire, and the gray one is like it's going to blast holes in you with bullets. And that's just his face. He walks like Frankenstein with his hands out in front of him. He never lets his fingers touch each other. So pretty heavy description. You got a picture of this on a page where there's mostly dialogue. It's like it's a moment of description. Also, this is like a character who terrifies the children in the neighborhood. So I mean, like they really do pay attention to him. And okay, that's right. I just wanted to say that. And on the other side, I think is basically a freestanding page of dialogue ideas that you might want to try. It's things to do to get some dialogue going. And if you're working on a book for children in particular, set yourself in a playground or in a school or some place where you don't know the kids. Maybe then you're going to get arrested for stalking them. But I'm saying so you don't interact with them because I want you to observe them and actually write down some of what they say. And then there are a couple of other things, ways to get some dialogues going. Because I find that often the drama of a story is in the dialogue, and you can find plots there also. So let me use our last 6 or 7 minutes together, maybe 5 or 6 minutes, to see what else you would like to say or ask, particularly about writing for children, but anything else as well. Oh, I did want to say that passage from Marco mentions Frankenstein. Frankenstein seems to be lasting as an image of culture that can be referred to, and that's one of the things you have to look for is things that people are still using. Frankenstein appears in Frankenberry cereal, and there's in Sesame Street. There's the Count that's Dracula. But anyway, so there are some cultural references that last. So if you can find them, yes.
I'm just wondering how much of the writing should be directed towards the parents who may be reading the books to small children. Do you ever use settings, references, innuendos that maybe the kid don't pick up on, but the parent does?
Yeah.
And it kind of brings them back to a place. So it's not only a fun experience for the kid to read the book, but parents are being engaged in the process too.
If this is something that you add in your revision part when you're preparing the product, rather than in your drafting, I think it's perfectly fine. I mean, you've got to, I'm trying to think of an example. I wrote one of my children's books. I named all the people in the family. I made their names be references to certain musicians. And I'm quite sure kids don't get that, but that's the kind of thing that parents might enjoy, just a little puzzle. If they don't, doesn't matter, So that kind of thing. Is that what you meant, or you meant something a little deeper than that?
Something that connects on an emotional level.
Well, to tell you the honest truth, I think if it's a good story, I think it's going to cross over. I mean, it may be too short, or it may be a little simple for adults, straightforwardly, strictly. But I think if it's a good story, adults and children, if it's a good story for children, I think adults will connect with the child or themselves and like it. That's what I think. Anybody want to add to that? I think it's an interesting question. Yeah.
Well, when he first said that, I thought about cartoons. How in humor, there's plenty for the adult to enjoy that the children don't get. But like you just said, I mean, I can go back and watch a Saved by the Bell episode and enjoy it.
And still enjoy it.
And I'm older, so it's appropriate for teenagers, So I think, in a way, you are right that, like, and my wife reads young adult fiction because she teaches middle school, and they want to talk to her about it. I mean, she gets them done in a day, but she enjoys them.
Well, and the other, yeah, good. I'm glad you said that. The other thing to keep in mind with young adult is that many adults read young adult fiction. My understanding is that like these vampire novels that are so popular, like the Twilight series, they are read by people, mostly women, but everybody in their 20s and 30s and even into their 40s as much as by young adults. And I mean, and the Harry Potter phenomenon would not be a phenomenon without adults buying those books as well as children, and you could go down the line. So I'm not answering you very well, but there's just some things to think about. How about one or two more questions or comments? What else? Yes.
Just a general perspective. What's a good seller of children's books now, as far as?
You mean what's one that would be one to read for a model, or one that's selling well?
Yes.
Okay. For what age group?
We say what? Now, 6 to 12 or
6 to 12.
Judy Moody is a good series for little girls. Junie B. Jones. My daughter's 7, and those are the books she likes. Is the Judy Moody because she travels. It's around the world. The American Girl series.
The American Girl series that tie into the dolls.
Also, the Magic Tree House is good for girls and boys because it puts them in history, and they get to be a part of history where they might not have understood it if they just read it in their history book.
So you mean they take an actual historical event?
Like the Great Fire of Chicago.
Okay.
And the kids are transported through the Magic Tree House, and they're there, and they're running for their lives, and they're experiencing the fear, so they're part of it.
Anybody else have someone for that age group? I mean, the ones that were coming to my mind were actually young adults.
Percy Jackson.
Which one?
Yeah, Percy Jackson.
Percy Jackson.
Now, the Hunger Games is a little maybe teenage.
But that's more 10, 11, 12-ish, the Percy Jackson.
Yeah, there's a big difference between 6, 7,
My
and
son loves
12.
7, but I
Yeah,
won't read
right,
it.
yeah.
Yeah,
Harry Potter's still popular with the kids too.
Which is the
Harry Potter.
Harry is still popular.
And it's AR books, so I read it.
I have two thoughts. One is that the fantasy stuff is very popular at all ages. They really like that. And I think one of the reasons is actually it does go away from this problem of what's contemporary. Because if you start writing about, Hogwarts School for Wizardry or whatever, you don't have to worry about the Kardashians or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's one reason that stuff is so popular. I just lost my other thought. Okay, anybody else? I have a book that she might want to turn to.
There's a new series that just started called The Witch and the Wizard.
The Witch and the Wizard.
The Narnia has done really
The
well.
Narnia series, although again, the age group, that's what I wanted to say. By the time we get to upper middle school, the time we get to 11 or 12-year-olds, the real readers are not bothering with levels anymore. They're reading adult books. Sometimes it's too bad, but they are. So once a kid is a real reader, they just go off and read. You'd agree with me on that. And high school kids don't want to be told. I mean, they do love these young adult series, but they don't want to be told they have to read young adult. They think of themselves as readers of sibling literature. So the people, the ones who really, for whom the age thing is important, I think are, as you said, the 6th, the 7th, the 8-year-olds, the middle grades, 3rd grade through 5th grade, maybe something like that. Okay, one final question, and I think we're out of time. Anybody have a last one? Last comment or question? Okay, well, I really wish you well with, hope you come up with a good children's book, and, let me know what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you.